Picture this. It's July 1875, and you're driving 2,000 head of cattle across the Texas plains. The temperature just hit 118 degrees in the shade, except there is no shade. The sun is so intense that metal branding irons left in the open become too hot to touch. Your horse is panting like a steam engine, and you've got 400 m left to go. Yet somehow, thousands of cowboys made this journey every summer and lived to tell about it. How did they survive in heat that would hospitalize modern people within hours? The answer isn't what you think. These men didn't just endure the heat, they developed cooling techniques so effective that some are still used by desert survival experts today. But here's the part that will surprise you. According to frontier medical records, heat-related deaths among cowboys were actually lower than you'd expect. Not because the heat wasn't deadly, but because they'd figured out methods that most people today have never heard of. Today we're revealing the 7 most ingenious heat survival techniques that kept cowboys alive in temperatures that regularly killed settlers, soldiers, and anyone else who didn't know these secrets. Before we dive in, you need to understand what these men were facing. The summer of 1875 was one of the hottest on record. The drought had lasted 18 months. Rivers were drying up and daytime temperatures routinely exceeded 115 degrees across Texas, but cattle drives couldn't stop. The beef industry was booming, and thousands of cowboys had to work in conditions that would shut down modern construction sites. Trail boss James "Iron Jim" Cook documented the challenge in his journal. The heat comes in waves. You can see men drop unconscious just sitting in the saddle, but the cattle must reach Kansas, and we must get them there. Cook's crew had a secret weapon. Techniques passed down from Native American tribes who had lived in these conditions for centuries, combined with innovations born from desperate necessity. That first technique, it's based on physics that wasn't formally understood until decades later. And if you think you know how to stay hydrated in extreme heat, you're about to be proven very wrong. If this already sounds impossible, smash that like button, because what's coming next will completely change how you think about water. Technique number 1, the strategic water management system. Cowboys learned to manage their body's cooling system like a machine, and it started with completely changing how they thought about drinking water. The common belief was to drink as much water as possible when you found it, but experienced cowboys did the opposite. They learned to drink small amounts continuously, keeping their bodies in a constant state of controlled cooling. Cook's journal reveals the precise method: 2 sips every 4 miles. No more, no less. Swish each sip for 10 seconds before swallowing. Never drink when you're already sweating hard. Wait for the body to cool first. The technique worked because it maintained optimal hydration without triggering the body's emergency cooling response. Large amounts of water at once would cause excessive sweating, leading to faster dehydration and salt loss. But the real innovation was in timing. Cowboys learned to pre-hydrate their bodies before the heat peaked each day. Chuck Wagon Cook, Dutch Henry Thompson wrote, "Drink heavy at 4 a.m. then manage with sips. Your body stores the cool water and releases it when the sun gets mean." This technique increased heat survival time by an estimated 40% compared to traditional drinking methods. But it required precise timing and iron discipline, which not every cowboy could maintain under extreme stress. But water management was just the beginning. The second technique used simple cloth to create what was essentially a personal air conditioning system. Technique 2, the cloth cooling network. The method involved soaking bandanas and cloth strips in water, then positioning them at specific pulse points: wrists, neck, behind the ears, and inside the hat. As the water evaporated, it would cool the blood flowing through these areas. Trail hand Sam Mitchell described the setup: wet cloth on the pulse points every hour. The trick is rotation. As one cloth dries, you wet another. Never let all your cooling cloths go dry at once. But cowboys discovered something that modern science later confirmed. Certain fabrics work dramatically better than others. Loosely woven cotton provided optimal evaporation rates, while tight weaves trapped moisture and actually increased heat retention. The most experienced cowboys carried specialized cooling rags made from specific cotton weaves that they'd tested over years of use. Mitchell noted, "My cooling rag came from my grandmother's old dress. Tried dozens of different cloths, but nothing worked like that particular cotton." The technique could lower perceived body temperature by 10–15 degrees when used correctly. However, it required a steady water supply and constant attention, resources that weren't always available on the trail. Now here's where things get really interesting. Cowboys figured out how to use the earth itself as a cooling system, and the engineering behind it was absolutely brilliant. Technique number 3, the underground cooling chamber system. Cowboys adapted a Native American technique that involved creating cooling zones using the Earth's natural temperature regulation. Even when surface temperatures exceeded 115 degrees Celsius, soil just 3 feet down remained around 70 degrees. The system required digging rest stations at regular intervals during long drives. These weren't full shelters, but strategic holes designed to take advantage of underground cooling. According to archaeological evidence at old campsites, these cooling chambers were precisely engineered. Trail boss William Davis documented the construction. Dig 3 feet down, 4 feet long, just wide enough for a man. Angle the opening to catch any available breeze. Cowboys would take turns using these underground rest stations during the hottest parts of the day. 20 minutes in an underground chamber could lower core body temperature enough to continue working safely. But the real innovation was in the air circulation design. Experienced cowboys learned to create airflow systems using the temperature difference between surface and underground air. Cool air would flow into the chamber while hot air was vented out. Davis wrote, "Position the chamber opening to face away from the sun with a small air hole at the back. The earth stays cool and the air moves through like a natural cooling system." The technique was so effective that some cowboys could work full days in extreme heat by rotating through cooling stations. However, digging the chambers required significant time and energy resources that weren't always available during urgent cattle drives. But perhaps the most counterintuitive technique involved clothing. Everything you think you know about desert clothing is probably wrong. Technique number 4, the strategic clothing heat management protocol. Cowboys didn't wear less clothing in extreme heat. They wore more, but they wore it strategically. The technique involved layering specific fabrics in precise ways to create insulation against heat rather than cold. Light-colored, loose-fitting layers would trap cooler air against the skin while reflecting sun rays away from the body. Trail records show cowboys wore long sleeves, full pants, and often multiple layers even in 115 degrees wear of heat. Chuck wagon cook Al Khali, Pete Morrison explained, "Skin exposed to this sun cooks like bacon. Cover everything but make it breathe." The fabric selection was crucial. Lightweight cotton and linen in light colors provided optimal protection, but cowboys also learned that certain fabric treatments could enhance cooling properties. Morrison documented the process. Soak new clothes in salt water, then let them dry in the sun. The salt crystals help reflect heat and make the fabric cooler against your skin. The layering system created microclimates around the body. Air would circulate between layers, creating a cooling effect similar to modern moisture-wicking fabrics. The outer layer absorbed and reflected solar radiation, while inner layers managed moisture and maintained air circulation. Cowboys who mastered this technique could work comfortably in heat that would quickly overwhelm someone in typical hot weather clothing. But it required specific fabrics and precise layering. Mistakes in clothing selection could actually increase heat stress rather than reduce it. If these techniques are already blowing your mind, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, because the next 3 methods are even more ingenious. Technique number 5, the timing and movement strategy. The 5th technique revolutionized how cowboys thought about work itself. They didn't just endure the heat, they outsmarted it. Cowboys revolutionized work scheduling to match human physiology and natural heat patterns. This wasn't just about avoiding midday sun. It was a complete rethinking of how to accomplish necessary tasks without overheating. The technique involved splitting work into micro-sessions timed to the body's cooling cycles. Heavy work would be done in short bursts with mandatory cooling periods rather than continuous effort. Trail boss James Cook documented the precise timing. Work hard for 15 minutes, rest in shade for 5, never push past the first sign of dizziness. A man who ignores his body's warnings won't see another sunset. But the real innovation was in reading heat patterns. Experienced cowboys could predict temperature changes hours in advance by observing wind patterns, cloud formations, and even cattle behavior. Cook's journal reveals sophisticated weather reading. Cattle bunch up 2 hours before the heat peaks. Wind shifts from south to southwest mean 15 minutes of cooler air around 2 p.m. Use that window for the hardest work. Cowboys also learned to coordinate group activities to maximize cooling efficiency. While some men worked, others would prepare cooling stations, manage water supplies, and monitor everyone for heat stress symptoms. The strategy required precise timing and group coordination, but it allowed crews to maintain productivity, even in extreme conditions. Cook's crew maintained their schedule even during the worst heat waves, while other crews had to stop work entirely during peak temperatures. But surviving the day was only half the battle. The sixth technique happened after sunset, and it was crucial for surviving the next day's heat. Technique number 6, the night recovery protocol. The most critical cooling technique happened after dark, a systematic recovery process that prepared cowboys' bodies for the next day's heat exposure. This technique involved more than just sleeping in cooler temperatures. Cowboys developed specific methods to help their bodies recover from heat stress and build tolerance for continued exposure. The protocol started with controlled cooling during evening hours. Chuck Wagon cook Dutch Henry Thompson described the process. Don't cool too fast after extreme heat. Shock the body and you'll be worse off tomorrow. Cool down gradual like banking a fire. Cowboys learned to lower their core temperature slowly using a combination of water consumption, strategic rest positioning, and graduated cooling techniques. Rapid cooling could actually reduce the body's heat tolerance for the following day. The night protocol also included specific nutrition strategies. Foods high in salt and minerals would be consumed to replace what was lost through sweating, while certain foods that generated internal heat were avoided. Thompson documented the meal planning. Salt pork and hardtack at night. Even in summer, fresh meat makes the body work harder to digest, generates more heat the next day. Save the beef for cooler months. Cowboys also learned optimal sleeping positions and camp setups to maximize overnight cooling. Ground-level sleeping took advantage of cooler air that settled after sunset, while elevated positions caught any available breeze. The recovery protocol could significantly improve heat tolerance over time. Cowboys who followed these methods could adapt to extreme temperatures within weeks, while those who didn't often suffered recurring heat stress throughout the summer. But what happened when all these techniques failed? The seventh and final method could mean the difference between life and death. Technique number 7, the emergency heat crisis response. The final technique dealt with heat emergencies. What to do when someone was already showing signs of potentially fatal overheating. Cowboys developed a rapid response protocol that could mean the difference between life and death when someone succumbed to heat stroke. The technique was based on understanding how the body's cooling system failed and how to restart it. The first step was immediate cooling of specific body areas. Trail records show cowboys learned to target pulse points and areas where blood vessels were closest to the skin surface. Sam Mitchell documented the emergency protocol. Get the man to shade immediately. Cold water on wrists, neck, and behind the ears first. Don't pour water over the whole body. Cool the blood, not the skin. But the most advanced part of the technique involved recognizing the early warning signs before heat stroke became critical. Experienced cowboys could identify heat stress symptoms that preceded dangerous overheating by hours. Mitchell's journal reveals sophisticated symptom recognition. Watch for the stumbles. When a man starts missing his footing, he's got maybe an hour before he drops. Slur speech means 30 minutes. When the sweating stops, you've got minutes. The emergency response also included specific recovery positioning and gradual rehydration protocols. Cowboys learned that rapid rehydration during heat crisis could actually worsen the condition rather than help. This technique required extensive knowledge and practice, but it saved countless lives during extreme heat emergencies. Trail crews who knew these methods had significantly lower mortality rates during the worst heat waves. So there you have it. 7 ingenious cooling techniques that kept cowboys alive in heat that would be considered uninhabitable today. These men didn't just survive extreme temperatures, they thrived in them by understanding their bodies and their environment better than most people ever will. These weren't desperate measures, they were sophisticated systems developed through observation, experience, and often life or death necessity. Every technique was tested under the harshest conditions and refined over years of use. What's remarkable is how these methods combined ancient knowledge with practical innovation.
Cowboys learned from Native Americans who had adapted to these climates over centuries, then added their own improvements based on the specific demands of cattle driving. The science behind these techniques wouldn't be formally understood until decades later, but cowboys had already figured out the practical applications through trial and error. They understood evaporation cooling, thermal regulation, and heat adaptation long before these became academic subjects. If these historical survival techniques fascinated you, you absolutely need to subscribe, because next week's video covers something even more dangerous. Which of these cooling techniques surprised you most, and do you think modern people could handle the physical demands that cowboys face daily? Let me know in the comments below. Next week we're covering the deadliest water crossings in Wild West history and the techniques cowboys used to survive river hazards that claimed more lives than gunfights. Trust me, those stories will make these heat techniques look easy. Until then, stay cool and remember that comfort is a luxury our ancestors couldn't take for granted.